Dr. Winnie Njenga is a doctor, board-certified American Academy of Aesthetic Medicine, and a clinical dermatologist based in Nairobi. I sit down with her for an in-depth conversation on ectodermal dysplasia. When we are talking about ectodermal dysplasias, what exactly do we mean in the simplest terms possible? Because it sounds like a very big term, but what do we mean by ectodermal dysplasias?
So ectodermal dysplasia refers to what we call syndromes, which means it's a group of conditions. This group of conditions tends to affect a particular part of the cell germline as you develop, which is what we call the ectoderm. So from the ectoderm is where we develop the hair, the nails, the teeth. So if you have an ectodermal dysplasia, what happens is that you tend to get a condition which affects all these things: your hair, your nails, your teeth, and also the sweat glands, what we call the appendages of the skin. So the sweat glands also don't develop appropriately.
So what is it that affects this particular germline, the ectoderm, that makes this particular part of the body affected? How does it come about?
So usually what happens is you get a genetic abnormality when the embryo is forming. So in majority of these patients, it will be something they inherit, mostly from their mothers. So during the development, the abnormality is usually coded on the X chromosome. So you find that when it passes down, for the girls, because they have two X chromosomes, they tend to have less of a problem. If they have those features, they tend to be a bit diluted because they have an extra X chromosome which covers for them. But for the boys, because they only get one X chromosome from the mother and a Y chromosome from the father, so those ones tend to be a bit more affected. So they tend to have a lot more severe conditions. In a smaller percentage of people who are affected by ectodermal dysplasia, you can be the first person to get it, such that there's no one else in your family line who's had this condition, but you get what we call a sporadic mutation, which means in the process of when the embryo is forming in the uterus, when the cells are multiplying, due to unknown reasons, sometimes this particular gene undergoes a mutation, and then you end up getting the condition, the ectodermal dysplasia, as a first person in that line.
Okay. So people that are affected by ectodermal dysplasia, what signs and symptoms will they show, and how early on in life will these things start manifesting?
Okay, so usually it's not so easy to detect ectodermal dysplasia, but what happens usually when the babies are very young, the mothers might notice that the children are very irritable or uncomfortable, especially when they sweat. Because what usually happens is that when you don't have well-developed sweat glands, the sweat glands are what cool your skin and cool your body as the body's own natural mechanism for cooling down. So because they have a problem with the development of their sweat glands, then they tend not to sweat enough. And when the environment is very hot and maybe other people are sweating, these children are just very uncomfortable, crying, and something little as feeding. When babies feed, they tend to generate a lot of heat. So after feeding, when they generate a lot of heat and they can't get rid of it, they become irritable, and the only way they'll express it is through crying. So the other features which you can detect in these children, which would be abnormalities in their nails, abnormalities in their teeth, those usually tend to happen a bit later. Maybe when the children start developing hair, maybe when they're older and they start getting teeth. So those ones you're not able to pick very early on, but later in childhood you can tell there's something wrong.
So what would be the abnormalities that will show, let's say, in their nails or in their hair or in their teeth?
So usually what happens, majority of them will have sparse hair, like the hair volume will not be adequate on the scalp. But even the ones who have adequate volume, the texture of the hair will be very strange. Like sometimes it's very rough, like what we call woolly hair. It looks like wool and not like hair. It's not as soft as hair. When it comes to the teeth, they tend to not develop normal numbers of teeth. So you can find like a child who's maybe 10 years old, when the kids have like almost all the teeth they're supposed to have at that age, this child may have 2 or 3 teeth. And also those teeth sometimes tend to have an abnormal shape, which they tend to look like a cone as opposed to the normal crown, the normal shape of the crown.
Like they're more canine?
Yes, yes.
More canine teeth than the way you'd expect the
Yes,
teeth to look.
yes, they would look almost like the way vampires are portrayed on movies or TV. So they're very sharp teeth and very spaced out. And also because your tooth development has an impact on how your jaw develops. So sometimes you'll also have an abnormally shaped jaw where the jaws can be smaller than what you'd expect at that age. So they can also have like the nails, you may notice they have abnormal nails. The nail plates are not smooth like the normal person, or sometimes they may have, the nails may be smooth, but they have like a lot of ridging where the nail looks like it has some hardened parts and then some other soft parts, and they won't grow as the way other children's nails grow.
And is there something about the palms and the soles of the feet with the people with ectodermal dysplasia?
Yes, so the palms and the feet are also some of the areas where you have a lot of sweat glands. And like we mentioned, the skin will not develop normally. So these kids tend to have a very thickened palm and a very thickened sole. And especially in those who hygiene may be a problem, or maybe they do very manual work, it tends to get what we call hyperkeratosis, where the skin becomes so thickened, whereby for a normal person, you can find maybe the skin is 0.5 millimeters thick. This person can have even a centimeter. And because of that thickening, you tend to find, because the hands have to move, they tend to get what we call fissuring, where you get like cuts in between. So that happens both on the palms and the soles, and can be actually quite a challenge in terms of everyday life. Yes.
So now you'd said that when the children are younger, because they are not able to control their body temperature, they will probably just cry uncontrollably, they are irritable. So how are mothers supposed to cope with this situation, and especially knowing that ectodermal dysplasia is a rare condition which may not easily be diagnosed? How are mothers supposed to cope at that time? Because sometimes people think this child is just irritable, or this child is uncomfortable.
Yes.
So at that stage in life, what is one supposed to do?
So yeah, this is usually one of the tricky bits, because usually unless the mother notices there's a problem, they may not take any action. So I would advise, if a mother thinks their child is being more irritable than normal, or more like incessantly irritable, the best thing to do would be to see a pediatrician. A pediatrician would be able to advise you. Once they assess the child, they can be able to tell whether or not this is that irritability is within normal, and also the pediatrician would be in a better position to assess for abnormalities. And once a diagnosis is made of ectodermal dysplasia, the only thing you can do from there is to educate the mother what to expect and how to handle the child, because unfortunately we're not able to do so much in terms of reversing those issues. But if the mother knows, for example, if when this child cries a lot, maybe they need some release from heat, probably they avoid overdressing the children even when it's cold. They avoid applying things which may clog all the pores on the skin. It's very normal to use petroleum jelly in our setting, but those may not be the best things to apply on such children, because they need as much aeration as you can get through the skin. Yes.
Okay. And so is there a way of finding out if one has a risk of getting a child with ectodermal dysplasia prior to getting a child with ectodermal dysplasia? Is there anything that can be done before, or even if it can be prevented before conception?
So what will usually happen, if you already have the risk, or if you're a carrier of ectodermal dysplasia, which you may know because you may have people in your family who have a similar condition. So at that point, you have like a 50% chance at every delivery that someone might get ectodermal dysplasia, unless, of course, in the unfortunate scenario where both your parents carry the gene, then of course the risk goes higher. So the only thing that can be done is that anyone in a family where they have that risk of ectodermal dysplasia, they should be made aware. So preferably you try and dilute those genes through conceiving with someone who perhaps doesn't have those issues. It will help reduce the chances, but we can't prevent it 100%. The only other thing we can do is you can do some genetic testing. Sometimes, if, for example, for a lady who's pregnant and she knows they have this history in the family, and maybe they want to find out if their children, if a child has a risk of getting ectodermal dysplasia, they can do some genetic testing while the child is still in utero during the first trimester. So that one they can look for those genetic abnormalities, and they can advise the mother whether or not the risk still stands to have the ectodermal dysplasia. Yeah, beyond that, the only other thing that can be done is gene therapy, which gene therapy can also be tried like early on when the fetus is very tiny. Then if they're able to knock out those genes and the fetus reproduces without multiplying those genes, then theoretically you can say you've cured them of the ectodermal dysplasia.
Right. So is there any treatment? Now that prevention seems to be a little bit tricky, is there any treatment once somebody has a child with ectodermal dysplasia?
Unfortunately, once you already have ectodermal dysplasia, the best we can do is what we call supportive management, which is where we try and manage as per how your disease expresses, because from person to person it might vary. One person may have more of dental issues, another one may have more of skin issues, another one may have more of hair issues. So depending on what you have, we manage that supportively. Otherwise, as it stands right now, we don't really have a perfect cure, which we can give you some medicine and we say from tomorrow this issue is over. But on the positive is that if you have a good team of healthcare workers who can support you, there are things which can be done. For instance, if a child has issues with their teeth and they're unable to eat, or the jaws are not developing properly, you can explore the option of having dental implants done at a young age, so that it doesn't affect the way their jaws develop, and it also doesn't affect their ability to live a normal life. And that can always be reviewed as the child grows.
What of the other symptoms, let's say the nails, the hair, the inability to sweat?
Yeah. So for those ones, the best thing to do is to advise. Usually those children, when they become older and they can express themselves, they start knowing how they feel when they're too hot. So if they experience those symptoms, the best thing is to cool down the ambient temperature, which can be done either through, depending on where you are, even something as simple as opening the windows to let in more air, or going outside, maybe not under direct sun, where you can get more aeration. If you're in an closed environment, you can do tepid sponging using some room temperature water that helps calm down the body. If it's a very hot day, they can explore options of swimming. Yeah, so generally what we do is basically try to control the ambient temperature. For the nails, usually not very much can be done, but you can try and manage how the nails grow. If you have extremely abnormal nails, sometimes it can be removed. Other than that, we just try and shape them. We teach them how to shape them so that they don't interfere with what they're doing and they can use their hands comfortably. Yes, when it comes to the palms and the soles, sometimes we may use, these patients may need the services of a dermatologist. We will sometimes use products which we call keratolytics, and keratolytics are basically chemicals which we apply on the skin, and they help the skin peel off. Because they have very thick skin, it would not be advisable to try very harsh methods such as scrubbing with like a stone or something like that, or some people try and get a blade and peel off. So those are not the best, but definitely a dermatologist can assist you with methods to manage that.
Anything for the hair?
For the hair, depending on how bad it is, sometimes you may attempt using camouflage methods, such as using a weave or a wig. And for those who like having stylish cuts, they can explore that as an option. But again, depending on the extent to which your hair is affected. So those ones can also visit a dermatologist and they can advise them on what to do.
So is there anything that society or the people around a family with such patients, is there anything that they can do to support or to help them cope with the environment?
Yes, so the first thing for people who are living with a chronic issue and to an extent disability, societal support is very important. So it's a good idea to educate, for example, the neighbors or the extended family, so that they have an understanding of what is happening, and they understand that this child is not harmful to society, and they understand that this condition is not contagious, and they also understand that from time to time this person might require their support. So patient education is actually very important, not only for the families that are affected, but for the general population, so that if you're in a situation where you're dealing with such a person, you don't treat them negatively or make them feel like they're abnormal, because yes, to avoid the stigma, because that can also affect them psychologically. But when people are more open and understanding, then these people can actually live a relatively normal life.
So what's the prognosis like? Is there any, do they live to the same life expectancy as normal people, or is there anything that can affect their outlook in life?
So for the most part, if you have adequate supportive care through your multidisciplinary team of healthcare workers, which means we're addressing the development of the teeth, therefore those children are able to eat appropriately. If you have that, then your life expectancy should be relatively normal. The thing that can happen to these people is that sometimes, the same way you're not able to produce proper sweat, your airway and your ENT pathways, they also require some mucus, which sometimes they're not able to produce, and this is protective from infections. So sometimes they may experience more severe infections, and of course infections sometimes can lead to mortality. But other than that, if they are able to access healthcare when necessary, they should be able to live a pretty normal life. Yeah, it should not reduce their life expectancy. Maybe what I can add is just to say that as society, when you're very lucky and blessed to not have any of these syndromes or congenital issues, you should not forget that there are people who live with these conditions and that they may need your support should the situation arise. We can support them in different ways through supporting their foundations, through finding out maybe what they need. Sometimes there are some things you can do for people, like some people who have very long, beautiful hair sometimes can donate their hair to be used by such people who unfortunately are unable to grow their own, and just generally to educate the masses and to be supportive, to those people.
Dr. Mercy Korir, KTN News.